Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to take sources like the MPP, cut through the complexity, and really pull out those key insights so you can get informed, quickly.
Yeah, and this whole series is about summarizing the MPE, chapter by chapter, section by section. Basically, shortcut to understanding U.S. patent examination.
Think of it as your guide through the maze. Today we're jumping into chapter 1200. That's all about appeals.
Specifically, MPP section 1212. And the title kind of gives it away. Board requires appellant to address matter.
Right. So our mission today is to figure out exactly what authority the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, the PTAB, has to, well, make someone appealing brief more stuff during the appeal. Sounds like they're pretty active.
They definitely can be.
Yeah.
This section, 1212, it talks about their power under a specific rule, 37 CFR 41.50 Ts. It gives the board discretionary power.
Discretionary power. Okay, power to do what exactly?
Well, it lets them require the appellant, the party appealing the examiner's decision to brief additional issues. Issues the board thinks are relevant to the appeal that's right in front of them.
So they can say, hey, we need more on this point, even if it wasn't the main focus initially.
Precisely. It's a tool, really. Helps make sure the board has all the info, all the arguments they need to make a sound and reasoned decision. They aren't limited just to what the appellant first brought up.
Okay, let's make this real. Can you give us some examples? What kind of additional issues might pop up?
Absolutely. For instance, the board might point to a specific court case, maybe a recent one, or just one they think is super relevant that wasn't really discussed in the briefs.
And they want the appellant's take on it.
Exactly. They want to know how the appellant thinks that case law applies here. Or, and this is where it gets really interesting,
Yeah?
they might ask for an analysis of prior art, maybe prior art that wasn't formally part of the record during the main examination phase.
Whoa, hang on. So even if the examiner didn't use a piece of prior art, or maybe it wasn't even submitted in an IDS earlier, the board can pull it in during the appeal.
If they find it relevant, yes. Under this rule, they can require the appellant to address it. It's about clearing up, novel issues or unresolved points. Could be legal points, like case law, or factual ones, like how prior art applies. Stuff they need for their decision.
Okay. That leads to another question, though. What if the appellant finds something new?
Ah, good point. Like maybe they find some important prior art after filing the appeal. You mean like submitting a new IDS?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Can they just send a new information disclosure statement to the board?
So this section touches on that too. If you file a new IDS while the appeal is actually under the board's jurisdiction, the board won't look at it right away.
They won't. What happens to it?
It gets held in abeyance, basically put on hold.
Held in abeyance, so it just sits there.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It sits there, unreviewed by the board, until the board is done with the appeal, after their decision. If the case goes back to the examiner then it might get considered.
Got it. Okay, back to the board, asking the appellant for more info under 41.50 ZA. The board sends this request. What happens next? Is there a deadline?
Oh, absolutely. A very specific time period is set for the appellant to respond. You can't just let it slide.
And if you miss that deadline, what are the consequences? Is it like a slap on the wrist?
No, this is actually maybe the most critical point here. If you fail to respond on time, and importantly without getting a proper extension under 37 CFR 1.136b, the board can dismiss the appeal sua sponte.
Sua sponte dismissal. That sounds pretty final. What does sua sponte mean for the appellant?
It means the board can dismiss the appeal entirely on its own initiative. They don't need anyone to ask them to do it. They don't have to give you another warning. Miss the deadline, and poof, the appeal could just be gone.
Wow.
Yeah. It really highlights how incredibly important it is to follow the board's procedural orders and deadlines. You might be used to getting extensions for responding to office actions under 1.136a. That's pretty routine.
Right.
But getting an extension before the board under 1.136b, that's different. It requires a petition showing good cause. It's not automatic.
Okay, so this isn't just a suggestion, it's an order, and ignoring it has, potentially fatal consequences for your appeal.
Exactly right. Diligence is absolutely key at this stage. Now, while the board has this power under 41.50d to ask the appellant for more briefing, it's important to remember this doesn't take away another option they have.
Which is?
Remanding the case. sending it back down to the examiner.
Ah, okay. So they could ask the appellant for more info using this 41.50D
Right.
request, or they could just send the whole thing back to the examiner.
Yep, two different tools in their toolbox. They might choose to remand if they think, say, the examiner needs to look at something first, or maybe develop the record a bit more on a certain point.
So strategically, is there a reason they'd pick one over the other? Like, what might make them go the 41.50D route versus a remand?
That's a great question. Often, a 41.50 request seems to be more about clarifying a specific legal point based on the existing record, or maybe how some known evidence or law applies. They want the appellant's focused argument on that.
Okay.
A remand, on the other hand, might happen if the board feels the underlying facts need more development, or perhaps if a totally new reason for rejection needs to be properly raised by the examiner first. So the appellant gets a fair shot to respond to that new rejection directly.
That makes sense. So getting a 41.50 request might signal the board is struggling with interpreting something already there, while remand might mean they think something is missing or needs to be formally added by the examiner.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah. And sometimes these things interact. It's possible that after an appellant responds to a 41.50 request, the board might still decide to remand the case.
Really? Why would they do that? They just got the extra briefing they asked for.
Well, maybe the appellant's response raised some new angles, or provided analysis that the board thinks the examiner should have a chance to consider and reply to before the board makes the final call. It shows how these proceedings can be, iterative, back and forth sometimes.
Okay, so we've covered this board power under 4150D, what they ask about, the huge importance of deadlines, the sua sponte risk, and how it compares to remanding. How does understanding this specific section, 1212, fit into the bigger picture of appeals in Chapter 1200?
Right, it's one specific thing that can happen after you filed your appeal and the briefs are in, but before the board decides. Remember the basic flow? You appeal an examiner's decision, then the examiner files an examiner's answer. Sometimes that answer might even raise a new ground of rejection. That's under 37 CFR 41.50A.
Yeah, and we talked about how the appellant has choices then, like reopening prosecution or filing a reply brief to counter the new ground or the examiner's points. That's under 41.41.
Exactly. So this board request under 41.50D is different. It's not a new rejection from the examiner. It's the board itself saying, we need more info on this specific issue from you, the appellant. But both scenarios, responding to a new ground in an answer or responding to a board request under 41.50D, they both demand really careful attention to procedure and timing.
Makes sense.
And remember, throughout this, the appellant always has the option to just pull the plug on the appeal, maybe by filing an RCE, a request for continued examination. That's under 37 CFR 1.114. You see that mentioned in form paragraphs sometimes, like 7.104. They're all just different paths you might encounter in the appeal system.
Okay, so let's boil it down. For you, the listener, maybe you're handling appeals, maybe you're just trying to learn the ropes. Why is really getting MPP Section 1212 important?
I think the key thing is realizing the PTAB isn't just passively reading briefs. They have this proactive power. They can actively seek out more information they think they need.
So knowing about 37 CFR 41.50 means you won't be totally blindsided if you get such a request.
Exactly. You'll know it's a possibility. And more importantly, knowing about the potential for sua sponte dismissal if you miss the deadline. Well, that's crucial. It could save your entire appeal. It just hammers home that you have to be diligent and responsive at this stage.
Right. That seems to be the big neon sign flashing here. Diligence and deadlines. Because messing up isn't just a minor hiccup. It could literally be game over for the appeal.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Responsiveness is just non-negotiable.
Well, this deep dive into MPEP Section 1212 certainly shows the PTAB has quite a tool in its belt with this 41.50D authority, a really potent reminder about staying on top of procedure during an appeal.
It really is.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this focused look at a maybe small but definitely critical part of patent appeals. This is part of our ongoing series breaking down the MPEP section by section. And a big thank you again to Mike Shepard for organizing this whole audio series.
And maybe something to think about. A provocative thought for you. You've got the board's power to ask you for more briefing under 41.50D versus their power to remand it back to the examiner. If you had a complex issue, which path would you rather the board take? Does thinking about that change how you might strategize your appeal from the start?
Definitely something to chew on.
And finally, the necessary disclaimer. This summary was generated using AI tools, including ChatGPT and NotebookLM. It might have errors or omissions. It's for general info and education, not legal advice or a substitute for proper instruction. For the official word, always consult the official MPEP, a qualified instructor or a registered patent practitioner.
Great stuff. Thanks for learning with us, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.